I find it quite impressive that you made your mom learn like Mandarin passively. So she would already correct you and like maybe mastered the tones too, at least when listening.
I don't think so. If I would ask her now what are the tones in Mandarin, she would have no clue.
No clue.
She
Yeah,
was
because
just
I was gonna ask that.
So, are there any common mistakes that beginners usually make when they learn Chinese or Mandarin that you could avoid early on?
okay. I think a big one is that a lot of people, it's kind of popularized in the media now that, oh, learning Chinese, so many people are now learning Chinese, and it's great. But people want to take the easy route by not learning characters. And you can only get to a certain level if you choose not to learn characters. And this might be different if you're, raised from a baby, your parents are immigrated to another country and they're raising you over there, and you might pick up the language without having to learn the characters. But if you were, you know, a teenager or an adult like me learning Chinese, it's really important to learn the characters because, with Chinese, the pronunciation system, because it is so repetitive or multiple characters can have the same pronunciation, you're going to get easily mixed up. Like, oh, is it that word or is it this one? And you don't know if you don't learn the characters. So you really have to do that, in my opinion. Another thing in terms of the pronunciation is that there's a lot of tricky things in Mandarin that people get mixed up on. For example, these sounds, zhi, chi, shi, people get them mixed up a lot, so it's quite imperative to get a handle on those, as well as ji, chi, shi. So these ones, I feel like it's quite important to practice them and get used to them so that people can understand you and you can understand others more easily.
Yeah, it does suck sometimes when like the best response to a common mistake is like, oh, you have to learn it. You have to learn it. It's like the same with German. Oh, what? How can I find a way to understand if something is a neutral gender or masculine or feminine? Oh, I don't know. You just look at the dictionary. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, thanks, teach, thanks. But unfortunately, there is something that you have to practice. You have to remember. There's like not everything is like a super mega, like, oh, you can do this technique to make things 100 times faster. You still have to put in the work for something. There are ways
Yeah.
fast in some parts, but not everything. And
I would say though
no, go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
I would say though there is like a strategy to learning characters that I adopted that kind of made it a bit easier to see why that character meant that kind of thing or sounded like that. And that is to actually learn the radicals. So I'm not sure if you know, but Chinese, it has about 200 or so radicals that actually make up Chinese characters. So they're like the little components. For example, there's a radical for water, a radical for heart, a radical for tree. So those radicals are actually in a lot of characters that are related to that meaning. For example, two radicals for tree connect together to make forest. Like it's quite logical in that sense. So I think it's really important to learn those characters, so the radicals, and then you can understand how characters are formed a bit better.
Yeah, this sort of system also is in Japanese as well. When you see a certain radical for water, you can expect that is something related to it. But if my YouTube algorithm tells me enough, there's a ton of things that aren't as like immediate or like are kind of, you have to take a little bit of a poetic mindset to understand some of them. I will probably put like an example on screen because I it's just fresh on my mind, but at the moment it's like I can't really go for it. But it's like radicals help a lot for sure, but there's definitely like some times where it's like, really, is that radical there like for talking about chicken and use this radical or something? I don't know, I'm just messing something up, but I've heard of horror stories of radicals and characters not making much sense, or at least like it's about feel. That's the word that a lot of friends of mine says. Of course, like I'm talking from the perspective of a European that doesn't know much of the language. You of course know it a lot better than me, so this sort of changes a lot of the perspective. It could be also be extremely wrong.
I mean, you do have a point. A lot of characters, sometimes I'm like, why? That doesn't really make sense. But you just have to accept it. But for a lot of them, there is that connection with the radical and the meaning, or the radical and the pronunciation. But you do have to be a little bit imaginative.
And that's wonderful. I love that. You can kind of, it's an entire exercise in itself to kind of give a reason to a character.
And going back a bit to what you told us that you were studying a lot on your own. How was your like typical independent learning routine when you were like guiding yourself through that process?
Yeah, so this was when I was still in high school. I was doing more like self-directed learning through distance education for the 3 years. So this was like a course on top of my regular courses in high school. So I kind of had to fit it in amongst all my other workload and homework and assignments and things like that. So I made a plan for myself. I think I was crazy at that point. I don't know why I was I was really fascinated with Chinese that I would wake up at 6:30 a.m. in the morning
Oh my God.
and do like 45 minutes of Chinese before going to school. I don't know what, like, I want that energy back. Where did that go? Oh,
That
What-
energy.
Insane. How do you even find
Yeah.
how? I'm sorry to break how.
Normally I am quite like an early bird, but even then 6:30 is pushing it a little bit. Yeah, I did that kind of schedule for 3 years. And also like after school, I would, as I said before, like practice with my mom, going through the word lists. I also made like my little flashcards on little pieces of paper, which was kind of fun. A lot of people use like electronic versions of flashcards, but back then, I don't know, I just liked creating things like that. And then I would also have a phone call once a week with my teacher, who was based in Melbourne, but that was only like 20 minutes once a week, so it was hardly anything. But apart from that, I would use like a lot of other language exchange apps and things to try to find more, Chinese native speakers to practice with. So I would like text them every now and then, and that's also another kind of method that I used at that time.
Yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit about more of the language exchange in a little bit, but before I want to ask you a question about other tools that a lot of people use as like, so a lot of people use certain tools and they kind of swear by it. So I want to ask you, tools like, for example, dictionary, repetition, and my personal favorite, talking to yourself for 6 hours a day, pretending to be a YouTuber. How does that fit into your everyday learning or everyday learning schedule, if at all? But also like be completely useless.
Yeah, in terms of dictionaries, I don't use like a printout hard copy like dictionary. I think it's just too cumbersome and annoying. But since I started learning Mandarin, I've used this same dictionary like up until this point. I still use it now. It's called Plecker. I don't know if I can say that here, but
Yeah, go ahead,
it's
go
quite useful. It's specifically for like English to Chinese dictionary. So you can save words as well, and look back on them, and you can just really analyze the characters and break them apart and see why those radicals come together to make that. So I use that app for a dictionary, and also in terms of like repetition, I would have, as I said before, like the flashcards. I use them more so at the beginning of learning Chinese. Now I just kind of depend more on running into this word in everyday life kind of thing. And if you run into it 4 or 5 times, then you pretty much remembered it. But flashcards really were only useful for me kind of in the beginning, intermediate stage, I think. And also a good one, you mentioned talking to yourself, and people can feel a little bit weird for doing this, but I don't know, I was doing that even now I do it all the time, but back then it was particularly because in Australia, there's not a lot of Chinese speakers, or at least when I was growing up in the countryside, the majority of people around me was, white people. So I didn't have that much opportunity to actually, come across native Chinese speakers. So I would just try to talk to myself, and it's really good because it cements that in your brain, like especially these words for like go in, come in, go out, like they can be quite confusing in your mind. So if you're actively saying it when you're like going into a room, or when you're taking a shower or cooking, you can just say, okay, 做饭，我在做饭. and narrate what you're doing. I find that was really helpful.
Yeah, it's also useful in not just like Mandarin, but in every language, especially like you mentioned like cooking. I think that's one of the best ways. You fake being your own chef and your own house, and you just speak the different language to explain it. I think it's a phenomenal system. I don't know about y'all. I love talking to myself. I like YouTube videos that I watch. So I will be a massive advocate for people to do that as well. Talk a YouTuber. Now, this is my propaganda. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. I'm sorry. I got a little bit too crazy over there.
And now switching from talking to yourself to talking to other people, like what role did language exchange play in the whole journey of your learning, and how did it change your confidence?
Yeah, as I said before, like I grew up in the countryside, so I didn't get that much exposure really to native Chinese speakers, but I was using a lot of apps to connect with people and making friends that way. So I feel like it was a really good opportunity to, expand my worldview through learning Mandarin. And I feel like I gained like a lot of confidence through learning Chinese, because right now it's become a big part of my identity actually. And my whole life kind of revolves around speaking Chinese, living in China. So it's really opened up a lot of doors, a lot of opportunities. And, this is all thanks to, learning Mandarin and being able to utilize it to exchange the language with other people. So, yeah.
Yeah, and allowing yourself to be able to speak with other people and to kind of get that exchange in allows you to not only be more confident, but to make your process a little bit more natural. And it kind of, I don't want to say clashes because it's not really the right word, but it does offer a very different experience compared to your previous style of learning, that it was a lot more exercise based. So I wanted to ask you, when at some point in your own language learning process, things starting to become more natural, I would assume. When that happened, like how did you handle it?
Oh, like when things became a bit more natural for me?
The learning was less about the structured system that you created with the exercises, but it became a lot more natural, a lot more spontaneous, a lot more fluid. Must be, or at least I would assume, a very different change in approach. And how did you handle that different approach after you reach a certain level?
I think I was struggling a lot with this transition from like intermediate to upper intermediate, kind of advanced level. This period took a very long time, and I still don't know exactly where I am on that scale. But I don't know. It's just something that you have to keep working on and learning new words every day and keep building to finally get to that like native like proficiency. But I think this was quite evident when I graduated from university. So in uni, I actually majored in Chinese. It was one of my majors. So that was also quite I followed a quite strict structure as well, with going to class and doing homework assignments. So as soon as I graduated, I was like, oh, what do I do with my Chinese now?